Good afternoon. We have the latest from the US presidential election with Haryanto Diman. I'm Olivia Quay.
And we have the Straits Times former US Bureau Chief Jeremy Au Yong with us, as well as US Bureau Chief Nirmal Ghosh, who joins us from Washington, D.C.
So Jeremy, Nirmal, thank you so much for joining us again on this very busy day. No surprises so far that we have seen Republican and Democratic strongholds projected to be won by their respective candidates.
Excuse me, now in the race to win 270 electoral votes, President Donald Trump has 114 while Joe Biden has 192. But we are waiting for results from key battleground states like Florida, North Carolina and the Blue Wall states. So Nirmal, let's talk about these three Blue Wall states, Michigan, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, which Trump smashed in 2016. Do you expect him to do the same, or will Biden flip the votes?
It looks right now that it's quite difficult for Joe Biden to flip those states, going by what's happening. Oh, by the way, and as we were speaking, NBC called Ohio for Donald Trump, right? And NBC has. So anyway, to those Blue Wall states, Donald Trump has made has got a lot of support there because of his support to the farmers. And there is still deep resentment from 2016 among his supporters over Hillary Clinton's comment, that infamous comment she made about deplorables, that Trump supporters are deplorables. This was something very emotional. So Donald Trump's support has held very steady in those states. And he's also been extremely energetic in his campaigning. So he is a great motivator and mobilizer of his base. I think that reflects it. I think it's going to be quite difficult, I would say. Although I have to say, it is quite early. We should not fall into the trap of assuming that it can't be done, right? Because these things go back and forth through the night.
Right.
I see. Well, Jeremy, what states will continue to be in play for a Biden presidency if Trump does take these key battleground states like Michigan, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin? Or at this point, are we still seeing this concept of a red mirage in these three states?
Okay, so I'm going to give you quite a long answer to that question. But so I think maybe for a start, it's worthwhile talking about how actually, what we are actually looking at, what constitutes results tonight. When you see our map fill in, or on any other outlet, you see their map fill in. These are not so-called official results. I think a Singaporean voter, somebody watching Singaporean elections is quite used to there being something official. A returning officer comes out and announces the vote count and the results on election night itself. You see that in Singapore. This is not what happens in the US. There's actually no deadline at all for when at least no deadline tonight. There's no deadline today for the votes to be officially counted and announced. So you don't get that. What you see being filled in is projections from the news outlets. Traditionally, how they do this projection, they have a complicated statistical model, and then they will go out and do exit polling. They will stand outside the polling centers, and then they will just talk to poll people coming out of it.
Yep.
That's traditionally how it's done. This year, because of a large number of early votes and mail-in ballots, they modified it. It's not so much exit polling, they call it voter polling. So it could be like, I know the Associated Press is going to poll 130, 140,000 people, just who have already cast their vote, whether it's early voting in person, whether it's on the day voting in person, whether it's postal ballot. So, and then they will feed that data into their statistical model based on how it has voted historically and all that, and then they come up with a projection. When they believe that that state is out of reach for the other candidate, they will project. And that is what we are looking at today. Whether we're going to get enough of those projections today to have a winner remains to be seen. Okay, now you asked me about Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. The reason we have spoken so much about these three states is that these three states, especially Wisconsin and Michigan, were the ones that polled the best for Joe Biden. So in the lead-up polling, they look most likely that the states, that these states were the ones that were going to flip from red to blue.
Well, right now they are looking like Mr. Trump is leading in these
Yes.
2 states.
So you see that across Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, he is leading, and he needs to hold all of it
Yes.
if he is to have a second term. If he loses Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, if either candidate loses all 3 of these states, it is most likely over.
That's a game over, yep.
Yeah, as I mentioned in our earlier show, that what we're looking at is whether Biden can flip 36 electoral votes from 2016. Trump has a 36 electoral vote buffer. These 3 states account for 46 votes. If Biden flips all 3, he is president.
Right.
If Trump holds on to all 3, he has a second term. It's that simple. If we talk about the red mirage or blue mirage, I mean, this was something we don't know whether it's going to play out. This is something people expect, mainly because of how the votes are counted differently in different states. So in states like Florida and North Carolina, the early people who voted early, they get to count that vote straight away. They count it early, and so when polls close, they can give you that result. The expectation is early and mail-in votes heavily favor Democrats. So if you count that first, you're going to see, oh, looks like the Democrat is winning. And then when you count the in-person voting, which is expected to favor Republicans, then that either switches or the gap.
That's when the mirage,
yes.
whether it's blue or red, will disappear.
Yes. And that's why Florida and North Carolina versus Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania are different. Florida and North Carolina, they count their early votes first.
Right.
Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, they count their in-person election day votes first. So you expect to see Trump leading, and he is in fact leading now. The question is whether when they get to counting those postal ballots, they get to counting those early votes, does that flip? We don't know. I think Nirmal says it's unlikely, but he also is quite early on in the day.
Right. Now, Jeremy, let's move from states to look at the performance of the candidates. You covered US election in 2016 as well, right, as our then bureau chief. How's Biden doing compared to Hillary Clinton in 2016?
Yeah, so the tricky part about that is, firstly, not all the votes are counted. And secondly, it does look like he's doing better some places and worse others. So a lot of the talk earlier today was about Florida and specifically the county that contains Miami. Hillary won that by 30 points in 2016. Right now, Biden is leading there by only 10 points. And that is not enough. So he's underperforming Hillary Clinton in that county by a lot. And he does seem to be outperforming Hillary Clinton in the rest of the state. But his large deficit in that, largely, people say, driven by a switch for the Hispanic voters who seem to have switched a little bit to Mr. Trump, especially among the Cuban Americans. That seems to be driving Trump's good performance there. That's what's caused Florida to most likely be won by Trump.
I see. Well, of course, Mr. Biden, Mrs. Clinton, not the main differences from 2020 and 2016. So what were the other big differences between this election and the one 4 years ago, Jeremy?
I would say one of the big, let's just go with one big difference. I think the one big difference is the number of undecided voters, or at least the number of undecided voters that appeared in polling. In 2016, it was the number of voters who were either indicating they would vote third party for another candidate not from a major party, or who had not decided leading up in the final days of the election. That was 12-13%. Both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were polling, you see their poll numbers in the low to mid 40s. That means there were a lot of people left who had not made up their mind. This round, you see the polling going in many cases, the popular vote for Biden was above 50%. And that left actually less than 5% of undecided voters that could swing to either side. So undecided voters make for very unpredictable polling. They're the ones that cause large swings. And because the number of them are smaller, we saw polling not swing as much.
Right.
Now, they can still affect the election, and I think that's the question we want to see today, how this group breaks. In 2016, the 12% broke overwhelmingly for Trump.
Do we know the demographics of these undecided voters?
Not really. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen a very detailed breakdown of who these people are.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Nirmal, you are, of course, on the ground now in Washington covering this election. How are things different, from now compared to 2016?
Well, I would say the country is more divided and in some respects angrier within. There was no sort of boarding up of windows and shops and fear of riots and whatnot on election night in 2016. Nothing like that at all. But now if you go to downtown Washington, D.C., the White House has become a fortress. It's got like four rows of fences around it. There's a protest going on. The roads around the White House has been closed. Shops and establishments, restaurants have been boarded up for blocks around the White House. And in downtown areas in other cities as well, in Portland, Oregon, in Chicago, for example, the same thing. Security forces are out or on standby, and they are actually expecting protests to sort of deteriorate into violence, and that is very new. I mean, America has had violence before, but it's different from 2016. There was no such thing in 2016. That's a big difference.
Right. So, Nirmal, you said, the country is very divided right now, incredibly polarizing views. So what are some of the key election issues that have been addressed, and how did the candidates, raise their viewpoints?
It's been a very asymmetrical campaign. If you look at the two sides of the political divide, they have completely different priorities. Democrat supporters put climate change and the pandemic management very high on their list of priorities, and the economy somewhat lower. Whereas Republicans, Trump supporters in particular, put the economy as number one. The pandemic is lower than that. Climate change is even lower than that. And there are also still very, very emotional divides as well. The whole idea of socialism, again, going back to the messaging of the Trump campaign to Cuban Americans in Florida and to Americans at large. A lot of Americans tell me, look, Americans are at heart not socialists. So if they are bombarded with this messaging that Joe Biden is a prisoner of the radical left of the Democratic Party and is going to usher in socialism and turn the country into a basket case like Venezuela, then it triggers people. They're afraid of that. Of course, there's also the conventional wisdom that the older you get with wealthy Republicans, the wealthier one gets, the more Republican one gets, and the more interested one is in lower taxes. And President Trump continually promises to lower taxes. And his counter argument is that the Democrats are going to raise taxes for paying for all this welfare. So all these are very deeply emotive issues, and they, I think, made a difference, in this, have been making a difference in this vote.
Yeah, Olivia, if I could jump in on that.
Yes.
Actually, I think another dynamic that we are seeing that we saw last time, they are not necessarily the case this time, is the willingness to gamble on Donald Trump. I think that remains a question for me today. But in 2016, when I was speaking to voters out in the, in heartland America, I heard this sentiment over and over again. Like, Donald Trump is an unknown, but I'm willing to give him a chance. Hillary Clinton they were kind of tired of the politics, and their politicians at that time. Hillary's unlikability score was very high. A lot of voters decided that they knew what they were going to get with Hillary Clinton, and they did not like it. Whereas Donald Trump was this political newcomer. They didn't know what they were going to get. They may not have liked some of the things he said on the campaign trail, but they thought, okay, this guy is going to shake up Washington. Let's give him a chance.
Right.
That was a lot
That's very
of, I
much
thought there
still,
was
that's very much still the sentiment now. I mean, talking to Trump supporters out in these, in the Midwestern states and so forth, it's still very much the sentiment. Some of them might sort of cringe a bit at the way he does things, his tweets and whatnot, but they say they love his sort of maverick outsider attitude, and they are really tired. And this says a lot about the political class in Washington. Unfortunately, I suppose they are really tired of years and years of traditional Washington politics, and they see Donald Trump as almost like a gladiator, almost like a warrior challenging the establishment.
Nirmal, do you see that as them almost, is it a hopeful vote? They are hoping for something that he will do, or is it an endorsement of his track record, of what he has already done? They see that and they say, oh, I want more of that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the main things that comes out is they love the fact that he keeps his promises. They again and again they say he keeps his promises. That's amazing for a politician to keep his promises. And you bring up the question of hope. I also think in 2016 there was all this criticism that Donald Trump is painting a dark vision of the future of America and so forth. Yes, maybe there's division and whatnot, but the fact is that he was bringing a message of hope to what he called the forgotten Americans, the Americans in these post-industrial towns that we've all been to, who were left behind by the winds of globalism and had grievances and were looked down upon by the globalist coastal elites. He channeled all those grievances. It was actually not a negative message for them. For them, it was a message of hope.
Can I also get your thoughts, Nirmal, actually on the way COVID is playing out? I know you mentioned it's asymmetrical, but for the country as a whole, how much is COVID factoring into this election? I mean, a lot of people have died in the US from COVID. Your sense from voters, is that something that is the handling of the pandemic something that is swaying the way they vote?
I think to a very small degree, but not enough to lose Donald Trump the election, unless of course he does lose. I mean, again, we're still a little bit early in the night, right? But yeah, to some degree, I've spoke to seniors in Florida, for example, who had lost loved ones, who were very concerned. But again, a lot of his supporters give him a pass on the pandemic handling. They say that anybody else would have done the same, that he did quite well given the circumstances. It was China's fault. China unleashed this virus on the world. And even if Joe Biden had been president, I don't see him doing anything differently from Donald Trump. So that's the attitude over there. Now, if you look at the Democratic side, COVID-19 again is a huge issue for them. But in the general population, you find a level of not coexistence really, but people are somewhat adjusting to life living with COVID-19. And that ironically also drives the new spike we are seeing, because more and more people are actually meeting up and getting together and so forth. Not to speak of the of political rallies and political protests, and which are super spreader events in and of themselves. But generally speaking, in the population, while there's a lot of concern and there's a lot of anguish over COVID-19, slowly they are beginning to get used to living with the idea and just hoping, taking precautions, but hoping that a vaccine will come along and whatnot. And unfortunately, as I said, that is also driving a new spike in infections.
Right. Now, of course, Jeremy, it's a close call right now. It's a close race, but of course, things are still too early to kind of say, and that is something that we've been talking about in the previous show and this show as well, that things are still up in the air. So what can we expect for the rest of the days? Do you think even the results will be in today, the full results?
Well, I hope the results will be in today, but I'm not optimistic. I think for the rest of the day, the attention will likely focus on the 3 states we started this show with, which is Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. I think the rest of the country is looking like it's going according to plan. Yeah, so to a lesser extent Arizona, but Arizona is only 11 electoral votes. It will be a blow for Trump to lose there, but it's not a death blow. So it is a question of, again, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, these industrial Midwest states. is there actually a red mirage, or is this the result? I think when we know the destiny of these 3 states, we will know the destination of the White House.
Right.
Okay, so there you have it. We're keeping an eye out for Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin as the day progresses. Thank you so much, Jeremy Au Yong, in the studio with us, as well as our US Bureau Chief, Nirmal Ghosh, in Washington, D.C. Keep checking straitstimes.com for developments throughout the day on our live blog and microsite. You can find a state-by-state breakdown, news developments, analysis, as well as social media updates.
Now, Olivia and myself will be back at 5:30 p.m. later on the Big Story, where we'll check in with foreign editor Bhagyashree Gareka. But if results are announced earlier, we'll bring those to you as soon as possible. So once again, I'm Haryanto Diman with Olivia Quay. Thanks for watching.